The blood on her wedding dress wasn't hers, it was the Viscount's, and he was still breathing when she stepped over his convulsing body to reach the altar where the creature in black velvet waited, one pale hand extended, crimson eyes gleaming with something between hunger and admiration. Wait, before the next revelation happens. If this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. "Pragmatic," the vampire said, his voice like silk dragging across stone. "I appreciate that in a bride." Eleanor Ashford had rehearsed this moment for 3 weeks, ever since she'd received the impossible offer that would save her family from destitution. She had not rehearsed stepping over a dying man to accept it. But then, Viscount Hartley had made his own choices when he'd attempted to interrupt the ceremony with a pistol and a declaration that he'd rather see her dead than married to a monster. The monster in question, Lucian Thorne, Alpha of the Northern Coven, Lord of 17 estates, master of the shadows that had ruled England's underworld for 3 centuries, looked utterly unbothered by the assassination attempt. He hadn't even moved from his position at the altar when Hartley burst through the chapel doors. He'd simply looked at him, and something in that look had made the Viscount's blood begin to boil in his veins. "I accept your offer," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the metallic scent filling the small chapel. Behind her, she could hear Hartley's gurgling breaths growing fainter. She did not turn around. "My hand in marriage. Your resources to save Ashford Manor and clear my father's debts. The terms remain unchanged? You haven't asked about his method of death." Lucian's head tilted, studying her with the intensity of a predator assessing prey, or perhaps something more complex. "Most humans are curious about what I can do."
Most humans haven't spent 6 months watching their younger sisters slowly starve, Eleanor replied. She took another step closer, glass crunching under her slippers. The chapel windows had shattered when Lucian's power manifested. "I know what you are. I know what you're capable of. That's precisely why I answered your letter."
A smile played at the corner of his mouth, revealing the slightest hint of fang. "You answered because you're desperate. Let's not romanticize pragmatism, Miss Ashford, though I must say your lack of hysterics is refreshing." He glanced past her at Hartley's now still form. "He was your betrothed first, was he not?"
"An arrangement my father made before he died, before we learned the debts were insurmountable, and Hartley's family had no intention of honoring the engagement once the truth came out." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "He came here to preserve his pride, not to save me. You came with a contract that will feed my sisters, educate them, provide them futures. I choose the option that serves my family, not my romantic delusions."
Fascinating. Lucian descended the 2 steps from the altar platform, moving with the liquid grace of something that had forgotten the constraints of human movement centuries ago. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with midnight black hair pulled back in a style that suggested another era entirely. His face was angular, almost cruel in its perfection, saved from complete coldness only by those extraordinary eyes, not merely red, but layered with shades of crimson and amber, like fire trapped in blood. "And what if I told you there are costs to this arrangement beyond the ones spelled out in our correspondence? What if I told you that becoming my wife means entering a world where assassination attempts like tonight's are merely routine?" "Then I would say, I've already made my assessment." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching, a feat that seemed to surprise him. You need something from me. Otherwise, why would the most powerful vampire in England offer marriage, real, legal marriage with all its protections, to a penniless girl from Yorkshire? You could have any number of beautiful, wealthy women. You could simply take what you want. But you came to me with a contract, with terms, with offers of mutual benefit. So tell me, Lord Thorne, what is it that you need that requires a wife rather than a victim? For a long moment, silence filled the chapel. Then Lucian threw back his head and laughed, a sound that echoed off the stone walls and seemed to make the remaining candles flicker. Oh, Eleanor Ashford, we are going to have such an interesting eternity together. The contract specified a mortal lifetime, she corrected sharply. I do not consent to transformation. Yes, yes, paragraph 7, subsection 3. He waved a dismissive hand, but something flickered in his expression. Disappointment? Respect? Though I confess, I included that clause expecting you'd want to bargain for immortality. Most do. Most haven't watched their mother die of consumption over 2 years. I have no desire to watch everyone I love age and die while I remain frozen. She straightened her shoulders. Now, shall we complete the ceremony, or would you prefer to discuss terms further over the Viscount's corpse? Ever practical. But Lucian's smile had changed. It was less mocking now, more genuinely intrigued. Very well, Father Dominic. From the shadows near the back of the chapel, a figure emerged. Eleanor had almost forgotten the priest was there. He'd arrived at sunset, silent and pale, and taken his position without speaking. Now she saw why. Father Dominic was also vampire, though his were the traditional crimson robes of the old faith rather than Lucian's modern elegance. The union contract, Dominic said, in a voice like wind through autumn leaves, requires blood exchange to be binding in both mortal law and the law of the covens. Miss Ashford, you understand what this means? I'll be bound to him, protected by coven law, untouchable to other vampires as long as the marriage stands. Eleanor had done her research in the British Museum's forbidden collection, accessed through a very expensive bribe. And he'll be bound to honor the contract terms. His power will be leashed, in a sense, unable to harm me directly or through manipulation of others. Very good. Dominic's expression might have been approval. And you consent freely? No coercion, no magical compulsion? Eleanor thought of her sisters, Margaret, barely 15, who'd sold her watercolors on the street to buy bread, little Catherine, only 9, who'd stopped asking for new dresses and started asking if they could afford candles for another week. She thought of Ashford Manor, her mother's pride, now mortgaged 6 times over to pay her father's gambling debts. I consent freely, she said clearly. Lucian extended his hand again, and this time she took it. His skin was cool but not cold, and she felt a shock run through her at the contact, something electric and ancient and altogether unsettling. Your hand, then, Father Dominic murmured, producing a small ceremonial blade from his robes. Eleanor had known this was coming, but her heart still hammered as Dominic drew the blade across her palm. The pain was sharp and clean. Blood welled immediately, dripping onto the stone floor in fat crimson drops. Lucian's eyes tracked each drop with unmistakable hunger, but his hand remained steady as Dominic cut his palm as well. No blood emerged, at least not at first. Then, as if reluctantly, a darker substance began to seep from the wound. It looked like blood, but moved wrong, too thick, too knowing. Speak the words, Dominic instructed. Lucian's fingers laced through Eleanor's, their bleeding palms pressed together. I, Lucian Thorne, Alpha of the Northern Coven, take Eleanor Ashford as my wife under mortal law and the ancient accords. Her life is mine to protect. Her will is mine to honor. Her blood is mine to cherish. This I swear on my true name and the darkness that birthed our kind. Eleanor felt something shift in the air around them, a pressure building like a storm about to break. The words she had to speak next were written on a card she'd memorized, but suddenly they seemed inadequate, too small for the weight of what was happening. I, Eleanor Ashford, take Lucian Thorne as my husband under mortal law and the ancient accords. His power is mine to trust. His protection is mine to accept. His oath is mine to hold binding. This I swear on my free will and the bloodline of my ancestors. The pressure crested and broke. For a moment, Eleanor felt as though she were falling, drowning, suffocating. And then something snapped into place inside her chest, a connection she hadn't known she was forming, a thread that now tied her irrevocably to the creature whose hand she held. Lucian's eyes widened fractionally. "Extraordinary," he breathed. "I felt that. I've performed this ritual 7 times over 3 centuries, and I have never felt the bond snap into place so completely." Eleanor tried to pull her hand back, suddenly frightened by the sensation, but Lucian held firm. Not painfully, but unyielding. "Easy," he murmured. "The bond settles. Give it a moment. You'll feel less like you're being invaded soon. You said 7 times." Eleanor forced herself to breathe slowly. What happened to the previous 7 wives? 6 died of old age, quite peacefully and quite wealthy, having negotiated excellent terms for their families. Lucian's thumb traced a small circle on the back of her hand, perhaps meant to be soothing. The 7th asked to be turned when she was 70. She's currently terrorizing the London social scene as Lady Blackwood. We remain friends. And they all married you for practical reasons? Of course, I'm quite clear in my proposals. His head tilted again. Why, did you expect a love match, Eleanor? I thought you were pragmatic. I am pragmatic. She met his eyes again, that unnatural crimson that should have terrified her, but instead only made her curious. I merely want to understand the pattern. The pattern, Lucian said slowly, is that I am the alpha. I have responsibilities to my coven that require certain appearances. A wife provides stability, suggests I'm invested in the mortal world rather than merely feeding on it. In exchange, I provide security and wealth. Previous wives have been content with the arrangement. And what about you? The question slipped out before Eleanor could stop it. Were you content? For the first time, Lucian looked genuinely surprised. His eyes searched her face as if she were a puzzle he hadn't expected to be challenging. Content? He repeated. I suppose I never considered it. I am alpha. Contentment is not really the goal. Then what is? Survival. Power. Protecting my coven from the hunters who would see us all extinct. His voice had gone hard. Negotiating with the other alphas so we don't descend into another vampire war that would expose us all to humanity's wrath. These are the things that occupy my time, Eleanor, not contentment. How lonely, she said softly. His hand tightened on hers, just for a second, a fraction of increased pressure that might have been anger, or might have been something else entirely.
Then he released her. The bond between them now settled to a low hum in her chest that she suspected would become part of her awareness like her own heartbeat. The ceremony is complete, Father Dominic announced. You are wed in the eyes of the Church, the Crown, and the Covens. Lady Thorne, welcome to the immortal world. Lady Thorne. Eleanor had known the title was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made something flutter in her stomach. She was no longer Eleanor Ashford, penniless orphan. She was Eleanor Thorne, wife to the Alpha Vampire of England. "We should go," Lucian said, his voice back to its usual cool detachment. "My carriage is waiting, and we need to be at Thornwood before dawn. I've already arranged for your sisters to be moved there tomorrow. They'll have the East Wing, tutors, governesses, whatever they need." "That quickly?" Eleanor blinked. "I am efficient." Lucian offered his arm in a gesture that was pure aristocratic habit. "And I keep my word. The contract specified immediate action on your family's behalf. Consider it done." Eleanor placed her hand on his arm, very aware of the strength coiled beneath the expensive fabric of his coat. As they walked down the chapel aisle, she forced herself not to look at Viscount Hartley's body crumpled near the door. "What will happen to him?" she asked quietly. "The coven will handle it. A tragic hunting accident, most likely. He was deep in his cups and mistook a shadow for a deer." Lucian's voice was utterly casual, as if disposing of dead noblemen was merely an item on a list of chores. "His family will receive a modest payment to ease their grief. These things are quite routine." "You've done this before?" "Eleanor, I'm 347 years old. I've done everything before." He handed her up into a magnificent black carriage with the Thorne family crest emblazoned on the door, a thorn wrapped around a crown with 3 drops of blood falling beneath it.
Though I confess, I've never had a bride step over a body to reach the altar. That was memorable. Eleanor settled into the plush velvet seat, her blood-stained wedding dress spreading around her like a grim prophecy. Lucian swung up beside her with inhuman grace, and the carriage immediately lurched into motion, pulled by horses she suspected were not entirely natural. "Why did you choose me?" The question had been burning in Eleanor's mind since she'd received his letter 3 weeks ago. There must be hundreds of desperate women in England, thousands even. Why specifically Eleanor Ashford of Ashford Manor? Lucian was quiet for a long moment, gazing out the carriage window at the Yorkshire countryside sliding past in the darkness. "Do you know what the hardest part of immortality, Eleanor?" "I imagine there are several candidates." "Boredom." He turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the carriage's single lamp, his eyes seemed to glow. Absolute, crushing boredom. I've had lovers and wives and companions, and they all blur together eventually. Sweet, vapid, content to be ornamental. I wanted— He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I wanted someone who would surprise me." "And you think I will?" "You already have." His smile was sharp. "When I sent that letter, I expected you to show up in your finest dress, simpering and grateful, perhaps crying delicately while professing your relief at being saved. Instead, you wrote back with a list of 17 questions about the specific terms of the contract and 3 modifications you wanted to make. Then you showed up in a dress that cost perhaps £5, looking like you were attending a business negotiation rather than a wedding. And when an armed man tried to kill me at the altar, you evaluated the situation, determined he was no threat to your interests, and proceeded with the ceremony. Eleanor, my dear wife, you are many things, but boring is not one of them." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm slightly. "I simply approached this logically." "Precisely. Logic is so rare, especially in matters of marriage." Lucian leaned back against the seat, looking more relaxed than he had in the chapel. "I think we'll get along quite well, you and I, as long as you continue to be honest with me." "And if you're honest with me," Eleanor countered, "why did you really need a wife now? You said you've been married 7 times before. What made this time urgent enough to seek out a penniless girl from Yorkshire?" Lucian's smile faded. For a moment, he looked ancient and tired. the weight of centuries pressing visibly on his shoulders. Because there's a war coming, Eleanor, not between covens, worse. There's a faction of vampires who believe we should stop hiding, stop pretending to be civilized. They want to rule openly, to make humanity our cattle. And there's a faction of hunters who've developed new weapons, new methods that could actually wipe us out. I'm trying to hold the center, to maintain the old accords that keep both sides in check. But to do that, I need to show strength, unity. A partnership with a mortal sends a message to both sides. I am invested in coexistence, not domination. Eleanor absorbed this, her mind racing. So I'm a political symbol? You're a strategic asset, Lucian corrected. There's a difference. A symbol is passive. An asset has agency. And I suspect, Eleanor, that you're going to prove quite resourceful once you understand the game we're playing. Who leads the faction that wants open rule? Victor Rask, Alpha of the Eastern Coven, powerful, ancient, and utterly convinced that vampires are the rightful masters of humanity. Lucian's voice dripped with disdain. He's been consolidating power for decades. This year alone, he's turned 17 new vampires, all of them violent, all of them loyal only to him. And the hunters? Led by a man named Alexander Cross, former priest actually.
He lost his daughter to a rogue vampire 20 years ago and has dedicated his life to creating a world where no other father suffers the same loss. Lucian's expression was complicated, not quite respect, not quite pity. Noble goal, terrible methods. He's developed bullets that can pierce our regeneration, toxins that burn like sunlight in our veins. If he perfects his research, he could reduce our numbers by half in a year. And you stand between them. I try to. Lucian met her eyes. That's why the bond between us is so important, Eleanor. Victor will test you. He'll try to seduce you, threaten you, maybe even try to turn you against me. Cross will try to recruit you as a spy, convince you that your husband is a monster who needs to be destroyed. You need to understand the stakes before we arrive at Thornwood, because the moment you step through those doors, you're no longer just Eleanor Ashford. You're Lady Thorn, Alpha's wife, and there are people who would kill you simply for that title. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine, but she kept her voice level. Then I suppose it's fortunate I knew what I was agreeing to. Did you? Lucian leaned forward, his gaze intense. Did you really understand that you've just painted a target on your back? That your sisters might become leverage? That every decision you make now has political ramifications? I understood that I had a choice between watching my sisters starve slowly in a crumbling manner or taking a risk that might save them. Eleanor lifted her chin. I chose the risk. I won't apologize for that, and I won't collapse in fear now that you've explained the details. If you wanted a simpering ornament, Lord Thorn, you should have married someone else. Lucian stared at her for a long moment, and then that sharp smile returned. No, he said softly, I really shouldn't have. The carriage rolled on through the night, carrying Eleanor toward a future she couldn't quite imagine. She thought of her sisters, who would wake tomorrow in Ashford Manor to find her gone and a letter explaining she'd married for their sake. She thought of Viscount Hartley's blood seeping into her wedding dress, a reminder that the world she'd entered was built on violence as much as it was on ancient contracts. And she thought of the bond humming quietly in her chest, connecting her to the impossible creature sitting across from her, the alpha vampire who claimed he wanted someone who would surprise him. Eleanor had a feeling she was going to surprise him more than he anticipated. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would surprise her too. Thornwood Manor rose from the darkness like a castle from a Gothic novel, all soaring towers and elaborate stonework, windows glowing with warm light that seemed impossibly welcoming for a vampire's lair. As the carriage swept up the long drive, Eleanor counted at least 40 windows on the front facade alone, each one illuminated, suggesting a household far larger and more complex than she'd imagined. "Impressive," she murmured. "It should be. It cost a fortune to build in 1687, and I've spent another fortune maintaining it." Lucian descended from the carriage and offered his hand to help her down. "Welcome home, wife." The words sent another shiver through her, though whether from fear or anticipation she couldn't quite say. The front doors opened before they reached them, and a woman emerged. Not a servant, Eleanor realized immediately. This woman moved with too much confidence, too much power. She was beautiful in a severe way, with silver hair pulled into an intricate updo and eyes the color of mercury. "Lucian." The woman's voice was cool silk. "You've returned with your prize. Eleanor, may I present Cassandra Blackwood." My third wife, now quite happily living as her own person. Lucian's hand remained at the small of Eleanor's back, a subtle claim of ownership that didn't escape Cassandra's notice. Cassandra, Lady Eleanor Thorne. Another pragmatic match, I presume. Cassandra descended the steps to examine Eleanor more closely, circling her like a predator assessing prey. Pretty enough, I suppose. Decent bone structure. Terribly young, though. "How old are you, dear? 19? 20? 22, Eleanor said, refusing to be cowed. And yes, this is a pragmatic arrangement. Lord Thorne was quite honest about his needs, and I was equally honest about mine. Oh, she has spirit. Cassandra's laugh was like breaking glass. How refreshing. The last two were absolute milksops. No offense to them, of course. They served their purpose. But you, my dear, might actually be interesting. I try to be. Eleanor met the vampire's metallic gaze without flinching. Though I confess I'm still learning the rules of this new world. Perhaps you could instruct me? Cassandra's eyebrows rose fractionally. Clever girl. Yes, I could instruct you. For a price. Cassandra. Lucian's voice carried a warning edge. She's under my protection. Coven law applies. I'm not going to eat her, darling. Merely suggesting a mutually beneficial arrangement. Cassandra smiled, revealing delicate fangs. You want to understand vampire politics, little Eleanor. I want to understand what's happening in the mortal court. Queen Victoria's heirs are making noises about modernization, and I need to know which way the wind is blowing. Information for information. Quite fair. Eleanor considered this. She'd spent enough time in London society before her father's death to understand the currents of political change. I could provide that. But I want more than just political instruction. I want to know about the factions Lucian mentioned. Victor Rask, Alexander Cross, where the true dangers lie. Already thinking strategically. Cassandra's approval was evident. Very well, we have an accord. Come find me tomorrow evening, and we'll begin your education. For now, I imagine you'd like to rest. Mortal weddings are exhausting, even without the attempted murder. She swept back into the house, leaving Eleanor alone with Lucian on the steps. You don't have to make deals with her, Lucian said quietly. I can teach you what you need to know. Can you? Eleanor turned to face him fully. Or will you only teach me what you think I should know? Cassandra has no reason to filter information for my protection. She'll tell me the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. Lucian's expression was unreadable. You're going to be trouble, aren't you? I thought that was what you wanted. It is. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gesture surprisingly gentle for a creature who'd killed a man with a look just hours ago. Come, your chambers are prepared. You'll want to clean up and rest. Tomorrow will be demanding.
Your sisters arrive at noon, and there's a formal dinner in the evening to introduce you to the household." Eleanor followed him into Thornwood, her blood-stained dress whispering against marble floors so polished they reflected the chandelier light like mirrors. The interior was as impressive as the exterior: soaring ceilings, elaborate plasterwork, artwork that she suspected was original rather than copies. Wealth beyond anything she'd ever experienced, now technically at her disposal through the marriage contract. They climbed a sweeping staircase to the second floor, then down a long corridor lined with portraits. Eleanor recognized some of the faces, nobility from various eras, all watching with painted eyes that seemed too knowing. "Your rooms," Lucian said, pushing open a set of double doors to reveal a suite that made Eleanor's breath catch. The sitting room alone was twice the size of her bedroom at Ashford Manor, decorated in soft blues and silvers that reminded her of winter frost. Beyond it, through an archway, she could see a bedroom with a canopied bed that looked like something from a fairy tale. Doors led to what must be a dressing room and bathing chamber. "This is..." Eleanor didn't have words. "Yours." Lucian leaned against the doorframe, watching her reaction with evident amusement. "Everything in these rooms is yours to do with as you please. Change the furniture, redecorate entirely, throw it all out and start fresh. The household accounts are at your disposal. Within reason," he added dryly, "though I suspect your definition of reasonable is quite different from my previous wives." "Where are your rooms?" The question came out before Eleanor could stop it, and she felt her cheeks warm. "Adjoining." Lucian gestured to a door she hadn't noticed, nearly hidden in the wall paneling. "For appearances, we share a suite. In practice, that door remains locked unless you explicitly invite me through it. I am many things, Eleanor, but I am not a monster who would force himself on an unwilling wife." Relief flooded through her, though she hadn't realized she'd been tense until she felt her shoulders relax. "Thank you." "Don't thank me for basic decency." His voice was sharp. "That door has a lock on your side only. Use it. And if anyone makes you feel unsafe in this house, you come directly to me. The bond between us means I can feel strong emotions from you. Fear, pain, rage. I'll know if something is wrong, and I will respond immediately." Eleanor touched the spot on her chest where the bond seemed to have settled. "I can't feel anything from you." "The bond doesn't work equally. I'm much older, much stronger. My emotions are muted to you. Probably for the best." Something dark flickered across his face. 347 years of existence creates a lot of complicated feelings, Eleanor. You don't want to experience them all. "Maybe I do." He looked at her sharply. "Why?" "Because you're my husband." "Because understanding you seems strategically important." She met his gaze. "And perhaps because you're not quite as cold as you pretend to be." Lucian was silent for a long moment. Then, "Get some rest. I'll send a maid to help you with that dress and draw a bath. Dawn is in 3 hours, and I need to be underground before then." "Underground? Where did you think vampires sleep?" He smiled faintly. "The crypt beneath the house is quite comfortable. Temperature-controlled, absolutely dark, protected by wards that would incinerate anyone who tried to force entry. I'll rise at sunset tomorrow. We'll speak then." He turned to leave, but Eleanor called after him. "Lucian?" He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being honest about the dangers, for not treating me like a fragile ornament, for this." She gestured at the beautiful rooms. Something softened in his expression, just for a moment. "You're welcome, wife. Try not to make any enemies before I wake." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Eleanor alone in her new life. She stood in the center of the sitting room, still wearing her blood-stained wedding dress, and let herself feel the weight of what she'd done. She'd married a vampire. She'd bound herself to an immortal creature who casually killed threats and negotiated with forces she barely understood. She'd traded her freedom for her sister's security. And, strangely, impossibly, she didn't regret it. The bond in her chest hummed softly, a constant reminder that she was no longer alone. For better or worse, she was Lady Thorne now. And if Lucian Thorne thought he'd married a simple mortal woman who would sit quietly in his manor while he handled the dangerous work, he was going to be very surprised. Eleanor Ashford, Eleanor Thorne, had never been good at sitting quietly. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A young woman entered, curtsying low. She was human, Eleanor realized with some relief, though she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone long accustomed to serving vampire masters. "My lady, M. Marie, I'm to help you prepare for bed." Her accent was French, her dark hair pinned neatly under a cap. "If you'll allow me." Eleanor nodded, and Marie moved behind her to begin unlacing the blood-stained dress. As the fabric fell away, Eleanor caught sight of herself in a full-length mirror and stopped, transfixed. The blood had soaked into the bodice, turning the cream silk crimson. Her face was pale, her dark hair escaping its pins, her eyes huge in her face. She looked like something from a painting, Bride of the Vampire, or some equally melodramatic title. But beneath the dramatic exterior, she saw something else in her reflection. A new hardness around her eyes, a set to her jaw that hadn't been there this morning. She looked like someone who had made an irrevocable choice and was prepared to live with the consequences. She looked dangerous. "The bath is ready, my lady," Marie said softly. "Shall I help you?" Eleanor nodded and followed Marie into the bathing chamber, where a massive clawfoot tub steamed invitingly. As she sank into the hot water, watching Viscount Hartley's blood swirl away in pale pink clouds, she let herself think about Lucian's words. A war was coming. Factions on all sides wanted to use her, manipulate her, perhaps kill her. She was a strategic asset in a game she barely understood. But she was also Eleanor Ashford, who'd kept her family fed for 6 months on sheer stubbornness and creativity, who'd sold her mother's jewelry piece by piece, negotiated with creditors, learned to make one chicken last a week, who'd taught herself basic accounting, law, and estate management from her father's abandoned library because she'd known, even then, that knowledge was the only currency that couldn't be taken from her. If Lucian Thorne thought he'd married a helpless pawn, he was going to be very surprised indeed. And if Victor Rask and Alexander Cross thought she would be easy to manipulate, they were going to discover exactly how wrong they were. Eleanor closed her eyes and let the hot water ease the tension from her muscles. Tomorrow, her sisters would arrive. Tomorrow, she would begin learning the rules of this new world. But tonight, for just a few hours, she was simply Eleanor. Changed forever, yes, but still herself. Still fighting, still surviving, still surprising everyone who underestimated her. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the disorienting realization that she was in a palace, not the cold bedroom at Ashford Manor. For a moment, panic seized her. Then the bond in her chest pulsed faintly, reminding her of everything that had happened. Married. She was married to a vampire, the most powerful vampire in England. A soft knock at the door preceded Marie's entrance with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, my lady. Lord Thorne asked me to inform you that your sisters will arrive at noon. He's arranged for a dressmaker to attend you this morning. You'll need appropriate gowns for your new station." Eleanor sat up, accepting a cup of tea gratefully. "Is Lord Thorne awake?" "Vampires sleep during daylight hours, my lady. He'll rise at sunset, around 6 o'clock." Marie set the tray across Eleanor's lap. Until then, the household is yours to explore. Though I should mention, the East Wing is being prepared for your sisters, and the crypt level is strictly forbidden. Of course. Eleanor sipped her tea, mind already racing. She had 6 hours of daylight without Lucien's oversight. Time to begin understanding her new home. After breakfast, and with Marie's help, she dressed in one of the gowns Lucien had provided, a practical day dress in deep green that actually fit quite well. Then she set out to explore Thornwood. The manor was vast, each room more elaborate than the last. She found a library that made her heart ache with longing, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books in multiple languages, comfortable chairs positioned near windows for reading, even a ladder on rails to reach the highest shelves. She found a music room with a pianoforte and a harp, a conservatory full of exotic plants that somehow thrived despite the English climate, a gallery with paintings spanning 5 centuries. And in a locked room on the 3rd floor, she found something else entirely. Eleanor had only tried the door out of curiosity, expecting it to be another bedroom or storage room. But when she touched the handle, something tingled through the bond in her chest, a warning, perhaps, or recognition. The door swung open to reveal what could only be described as a war room. Maps covered every wall. England, Europe, even some from further abroad. Red pins marked certain locations. Black pins marked hunter strongholds. Silver pins scattered across London particularly densely. A large table in the center held more papers, reports, letters, sketches of people she didn't recognize. Eleanor knew she should leave immediately. This was clearly Lucien's private strategic center, not meant for her eyes. But curiosity and the pragmatic understanding that knowledge was power kept her feet planted. She moved to the nearest map, studying the pens. Red seemed to mark vampire territories. Black must be hunter strongholds. Silver, she leaned closer, reading tiny notations. Silver marked contested zones, areas where both vampires and hunters were active, where violence was most likely. I wondered how long before you found this room. Eleanor spun to find Cassandra leaning in the doorway, looking amused rather than alarmed. The vampire wore a day dress in deep burgundy, her silver hair gleaming in the light from the windows. "I thought vampires slept during the day," Eleanor said, heart still racing from the surprise. "Younger vampires do. Those of us over 2 centuries can function in daylight, though it's uncomfortable, like a permanent headache." Cassandra glided into the room. "Lucien knows I sometimes check his maps during the day, making sure he hasn't missed anything. He tolerates it because I'm useful." "Should I leave?" "Should you?" Cassandra's metallic eyes glittered with challenge. "You're Lady Thorn now. This is your home, your husband's war. Do you think you should leave?" Eleanor considered, then turned back to the map. "No. I think I should understand what I've married into." "Excellent answer." Cassandra joined her at the table, picking up one of the reports. "Let me educate you properly, then. You wanted to know about the factions. Here's where we start." For the next hour, Cassandra provided a ruthlessly efficient overview of the vampire world. Victor Rask's Eastern Coven controlled most of Eastern Europe and was expanding aggressively. His followers believed in the old ways, vampires as apex predators, humans as livestock. He'd been making incursions into Lucien's territory for decades, testing boundaries, turning humans without permission, sowing chaos. Alexander Cross's hunters had begun as a small group of bereaved parents and religious zealots, but had grown into something far more organized. They had funding from wealthy benefactors, weapons specifically designed to kill vampires, and an intelligence network that rivaled the Coven's own. "And Lucien stands between them," Eleanor murmured, studying a cluster of silver pins around London, trying to maintain the balance. trying to prevent a war that would expose us all. Cassandra's voice was grim. If Victor attacks openly, the hunters will retaliate. If the hunters become too aggressive, the covens will unite and strike back. Either scenario ends with streets running red and vampires revealed to the world. The mortal governments would be forced to act, and even we couldn't survive a coordinated military assault. So, Lucian negotiates, makes deals, shows strength when necessary, restraint when possible. Precisely. And now he has you, a mortal wife who represents his commitment to coexistence. Cassandra's gaze was sharp. Victor will see you as weakness, a hostage to exploit. Cross will see you as a potential ally, someone he can turn against Lucian. And what do you see me as? Eleanor asked. Cassandra smiled slowly. I see you as a variable Lucian didn't fully calculate. He wanted a pragmatic wife who would stay safe and symbolic. But you're here, in his war room, asking questions and already thinking strategically. You're going to complicate things beautifully. Before Eleanor could respond, church bells chimed in the distance. Noon. Her sisters would be arriving. Go, Cassandra said. Greet your family, play the happy new bride, but come find me tonight after dinner. There's much more you need to know, and not all of it should wait. Eleanor hurried back to her rooms, smoothing her dress and hair. Marie met her at the door, looking slightly panicked. My lady, your sisters have arrived early. They're in the drawing room, and they seem distressed. Eleanor's heart clenched. She rushed downstairs to find Margaret and Catherine huddled together on a settee, both looking utterly overwhelmed. Margaret's face was tear-streaked, while little Catherine clutched a worn doll and stared at the opulent room with huge eyes. Ellie! Margaret leaped up and threw herself into Eleanor's arms, sobbing, What have you done? They said you married a monster, that you sold yourself to save us. I married Lord Thorne to save our family, Eleanor said firmly, holding her sister close, and he is not a monster. Unusual, yes, but he's kept every promise he made. He's a vampire, Margaret hissed, pulling back to search Eleanor's face. Mrs. Crawford from the village told us. Said the whole county knows, but they're too frightened to speak against him because he owns half the land and could ruin anyone who crosses him. He's a vampire, yes. Eleanor crouched down to Catherine's level, taking the little girl's hand. But he's promised to protect us, educate you both, give you futures beyond anything we could have managed at Ashford. Isn't that what matters? Catherine's lower lip trembled. Are you going to become a vampire too? No, darling. That's specifically forbidden in our marriage contract. Eleanor smoothed Catherine's hair. I'll stay human my whole life. I'll just live in a very grand house with a husband who sleeps during the day and works at night. It's not natural, Margaret said, but her voice had lost some of its panic. Ellie, are you safe, truly? Eleanor thought of the bond humming in her chest, of Lucian's promise that he would feel if she was in danger, of the locked door between their rooms that only she could open. I'm safe, she said, safer than I would have been if we'd stayed at Ashford Manor with the creditors circling. This was the right choice, Meg, I promise. Margaret studied her face for a long moment, then sighed. You look different, older, harder. I feel different. Eleanor stood, squeezing Catherine's hand. But I'm still your sister, and I'm going to make sure you both have everything you deserve. Education, gowns, proper introductions to society when you're old enough. Margaret, you'll be able to study art seriously. Catherine, you can have all the books you want. Catherine's eyes went wide. All the books? There's a library here with thousands of them. You can read every single one if you like. That, finally, brought a small smile to Catherine's face. Margaret still looked troubled, but she nodded slowly. If you're certain this is what you want, I'm certain this is what we need, Eleanor corrected gently. Now, let me show you your rooms. They're beautiful. You're going to love them. The afternoon passed in a blur of settling her sisters, introducing them to the household staff, and trying to make Thornwood feel less like a vampire's lair and more like home. By the time sunset approached, Eleanor was exhausted but satisfied. Margaret and Catherine were ensconced in their new rooms, exploring wardrobes full of new dresses and exclaiming over the view of the gardens. Marie helped Eleanor change for dinner into a gown that made her breath catch, deep midnight blue silk with silver embroidery that looked like frost patterns. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever worn. "Lord Thorn will be awake soon," Marie said, pinning Eleanor's hair into an elegant updo. "The household gathers for dinner at 7. It's quite an experience, my lady. You should be prepared." "How many people are we talking about?" "Tonight, perhaps 20. The core household, Lord Thorn, Lady Blackwood, and several other high-ranking vampires who live here, plus various human staff and a few mortal guests who are aware of the situation." Marie met Eleanor's eyes in the mirror. "They'll all be evaluating you, my lady, wondering if you're strong enough to be Lady Thorn." "Then I'll have to show them I am," Eleanor said, with more confidence than she felt. The dining room was even more impressive than the rest of the house. A long table that could seat 40, lit by 3 massive chandeliers, walls lined with portraits of previous Lord and Lady Thorns throughout the centuries. Eleanor counted 17 people already seated when she entered, their conversations dying away as all eyes turned to her. Lucian rose from his position at the head of the table, and Eleanor's breath caught.
She'd seen him last night, of course, but somehow, in evening dress, with his hair loose around his shoulders, he looked even more dangerous and otherworldly. His eyes found hers across the room, and something passed between them through the bond. Recognition, perhaps, or approval at her appearance. "My wife," he said, the words carrying to every corner of the room. "Lady Eleanor Thorn." He extended his hand, and Eleanor crossed to him with her head high, very aware of every gaze tracking her movement. Lucian pulled out the chair to his right, the position of honor, and seated her himself before returning to his own seat. "My household," he said to Eleanor, gesturing around the table. "Some you've met. Others you'll come to know. All of them are sworn to the Northern Coven and bound by the accords that protect you as my wife." Eleanor nodded, meeting the eyes of each person in turn. Some were clearly vampires, that unnatural stillness, those 2 bright eyes. Others were human, though they watched her with wariness that suggested they knew exactly what they served. Cassandra sat near the far end, raising her wineglass in a small salute. Next to her sat a vampire who looked barely 20, with golden hair and an angelic face that probably hid centuries of experience. Across from them, a severe-looking woman in black, human, Eleanor thought, but radiating such authority that she must hold significant power in the household. "Mrs. Ainsworth," Lucian said, following Eleanor's gaze, "my head of household. She manages everything during daylight hours." "My lady." Mrs. Ainsworth inclined her head. "If you have any questions about the running of Thornwood, I'm at your disposal." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "I have quite a few questions, actually. Perhaps we could meet tomorrow morning?" Something like approval flickered across Mrs. Ainsworth's stern face. "I would welcome that." Dinner was served, an elaborate affair of 7 courses, each one more decadent than the last. Eleanor noticed that while the vampires had food placed before them, they merely pushed it around their plates. Their wine, however, they drank deeply, and she suspected it wasn't entirely wine. "You're observant," the golden-haired vampire said, leaning forward to catch her eye. "I'm Sebastian. I've been with Lucian for 80 years. The wine is supplemented, yes. We can eat food, but it provides no sustenance.
We drink it for the taste, the ritual. The blood is mixed in, less obvious than serving it straight from crystal goblets. I see. Eleanor kept her voice steady despite the revelation. And where do you... She trailed off, not quite sure how to phrase the question. Source it. Sebastian's smile was knowing. Donations, mostly. We have arrangements with hospitals, blood banks, some volunteer donors who are compensated generously. Lucian forbids hunting, except in extreme circumstances, and even then, never to the point of death. A progressive policy, Eleanor said carefully. A necessary one. This came from Lucian, who'd been watching their exchange. We survive by maintaining the masquerade. Random corpses drained of blood tend to attract unwanted attention. Victor Rask doesn't agree, of course. He still believes in the old ways, taking what you want, disposing of the evidence, terrifying humans into silence. Which is precisely why a war is inevitable, said a voice from Eleanor's left. She turned to find a vampire she hadn't noticed before, his face scarred and his eyes hard. You can't negotiate with Rask, Vrusian. He sees your restraint as weakness. And attacking him directly would give him exactly the war he wants, Marcus. Lucian's voice was steel wrapped in silk, which would serve no one except the hunters. The hunters are already moving against us. Gentlemen, Cassandra's voice cut through the rising tension. Perhaps this discussion can wait until after dinner. Lady Thorne has had a long day, and this is meant to be a celebration of the Alpha's marriage, not a war council. Marcus subsided, though his expression remained stormy. Eleanor felt the undercurrents of tension around the table, factions, disagreements, old arguments that had clearly been going on for years. "Tell us about yourself, Lady Thorne," Sebastian said, clearly trying to lighten the mood. "Cassandra says you're surprisingly well educated for someone from such a small manor." "My mother believed in education," Eleanor said. "I read extensively from my father's library. History, law, literature, some basic sciences. When my parents died, I had to teach myself estate management and accounting as well." "And that's how you survived 6 months keeping Ashford Manor running on essentially no income." Lucian's voice held something that might have been pride. Quite impressive. "I did what was necessary." Eleanor met his eyes. "As you do what's necessary to maintain the balance between the factions. We're not so different, you and I." Silence fell around the table. Then Sebastian laughed, delighted. "Oh, she's perfect, Lucian. Absolutely perfect. I can't wait to see how this plays out." The rest of dinner passed in a blur of conversation, subtle tests disguised as polite questions, and Eleanor's growing understanding of the complex web of relationships that made up Thornwood's household. By the time dessert was cleared, she was mentally exhausted but exhilarated. She'd held her own. She'd shown them she was more than just a frightened mortal. As the gathering dispersed, Lucian caught her elbow gently. "A word in my study?" Eleanor nodded, following him through the maze of corridors to a room she hadn't yet discovered, a masculine space of dark wood and leather, dominated by a massive desk covered in papers. A fire burned in the grate despite the summer evening, casting dancing shadows. "You did well tonight," Lucian said, pouring 2 glasses of brandy and offering her one. "Better than I expected, honestly. Marcus was testing you with that war talk, and you didn't panic." "Should I have?" Eleanor accepted the brandy, though she barely sipped it. "Most mortals would have." Lucian settled into the chair behind his desk, studying her. "You're adapting quickly, perhaps too quickly. It makes me wonder what you're not showing me." "I found your war room today," Eleanor said bluntly. "Cassandra educated me on the factions. I know about Victor Rask's expansion plans and Alexander Cross's weapons research. I know you're trying to prevent a war that could expose vampires to the world and trigger a genocide." Lucian's eyes narrowed. "And what do you think of that?" I think you're playing a dangerous game with insufficient pieces. Eleanor set down her brandy and moved to stand across the desk from him. You need more allies, more information, more ways to pressure both sides without it looking like pressure. And I think I can help. Help? I'm your mortal wife. I can move in circles you can't. I can attend society events during the day, cultivate relationships with families that might be useful. I'm invisible in ways you aren't. No one expects a newly married woman to be politically sophisticated. They'll talk around me, assuming I'm decorative and harmless. Lucian leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. You want to be a spy. I want to be useful. Eleanor leaned forward. You married me because you needed a symbolic wife, fine. But I'm offering you something more valuable, a strategic partner who can operate where you can't. Use me, Lucian. Let me prove I'm worth more than just the appearance of mortality. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then, you're serious. Completely. You understand the risks? If Victor or Cross discover you're actively working against them, the marriage contract won't protect you. I understand. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I didn't marry you to sit in a palace and be decorative. I married you to save my family, yes, but also because you offered me a glimpse of a larger world. I want to be part of that world, Lucian. I want to matter. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, respect, and something else she couldn't quite identify. You already matter, he said quietly. But if you're determined to throw yourself into danger, I suppose I should at least ensure you're properly prepared. You'll let me help? I'll let you try. He stood, moving around the desk to stand close to her. But there are conditions. You report everything to me. You take no unnecessary risks. And if I say you need to step back from something, you listen. Agreed? Eleanor extended her hand. Agreed. Lucian took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he turned it over and pressed his lips to her palm, a gesture somewhere between chivalry and possession that sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Welcome to the war, Lady Thorne," he murmured against her skin. "Try not to get killed." "I'll do my best," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. She had a feeling she'd just made either the best or worst decision of her life. Time would tell which. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor's days fell into a pattern. Mornings with Mrs. Ainsworth learning the complex running of Thornwood's household. Afternoons with her sisters ensuring they were settling in properly. Evenings studying maps and reports in Lucian's war room. And nights at dinner navigating the intricate politics of vampire society. Cassandra proved to be an invaluable teacher, brutal in her honesty, and surprisingly patient when Eleanor asked questions. Sebastian became an unlikely ally, his centuries of experience providing context for the current conflicts. Even Marcus, initially hostile, seemed to grudgingly accept her presence once she demonstrated she wasn't going to faint at the first mention of violence. And Lucian? Lucian was harder to read. He kept his promise about the locked door between their rooms, never attempting to enter her private space. But he sought her company in other ways. He taught her to read vampire political correspondence, the subtle codes and formal language that could mean the difference between alliance and insult. He brought her to his private meetings with coven members, silently communicating that she was to be included in strategic discussions. He even, on one memorable evening, taught her basic self-defense, because if you're going to walk into danger, you should at least know how to punch someone properly. But he never touched her beyond the practical, a hand at her elbow to guide her, a brief squeeze of her shoulder in approval. The kiss on her palm that first night remained singular, a moment she sometimes wondered if she'd imagined. But the bond between them, however, grew stronger. Eleanor could now sense his moods, not specifics, but general impressions, tension, satisfaction, amusement. And once, late at night when she'd been reading in bed, a wave of something that felt like loneliness so profound it made her chest ache. She'd almost gone to the connecting door that night, almost knocked, almost asked if he was all right. But she'd stopped herself, uncertain if he would welcome the intrusion or resent it. On the 15th day of her marriage, everything changed. Eleanor was in the garden with Catherine, helping her collect specimens for a botanical study when Mrs. Ainsworth appeared with a letter. "My lady, this arrived by special courier. The seal is unfamiliar." Eleanor took the letter, examining the wax seal. A rook in flight, wings spread. She didn't recognize it, but something about it made the bond in her chest tighten uncomfortably.
Lady Thorne, I hope this letter finds you well and adjusting to your new circumstances. I confess I was most intrigued to learn of Lucian's latest marriage. 8 wives in 3 centuries, quite the romantic, our Alpha. I would very much like to meet you. I'm hosting a gathering at my London residence next Friday, a small soirée, quite exclusive. Your husband is invited, of course, but I understand he's been avoiding London lately, something about hunter activity making the streets dangerous after dark. Do come. I promise you'll find it educational. We have so much to discuss about your husband's policies. Respectfully, Lord Victor Rask. Eleanor's blood ran cold. This was it, the test Cassandra had warned her about. Victor Rask, leader of the faction that wanted open vampire rule, inviting her to London while casually implying that Lucian was too afraid to attend himself. "My lady?" Mrs. Ainsworth's voice was carefully neutral. "Shall I inform Lord Thorne?" "He's asleep." Eleanor glanced at the sun still high in the sky. "He won't wake for hours. But yes, leave the letter in his study where he'll see it immediately."